All right, they get a 30-second delay. There we go. Seven watching now. 6 watching now. We're losing now. We better get started. All right. So, welcome to Teaching Strategies, the lecture series and education course. We have 6 watching right now. We have had 5 watching now. Okay, we're losing them. Better get going. At the moment, we have no one in the class with us. Last time we had 3. No one. We have Abraham. Abraham is helping us with the technical aspects of things, and that's a good thing. So thank you for tuning in, and I'm sure several people will be watching later here at Fairhaven. Yep, I see we have the sound now. At Fairhaven, it is our candy sale. It's the day that we're all in school today, and tomorrow we'll go back out selling, so many people are getting ready for that. But we're going to have this lecture time right here, right now. Just a reminder about our course. The purpose of this course, the purpose of this series is to explore and discuss various strategies used to teach effectively at all levels of instruction. The focus is primarily academic, so primarily classroom settings, school classroom settings, but it can definitely be applied to religious instruction. And the series will revolve around a model profile of a competent teacher. In our last session, we kind of went through several different aspects of a competent teacher, teaching competency profile. And we're going to begin going into one of those in tonight's lecture. The text for the course, as on the page, and also is this Models, Strategies, and Methods for Effective Teaching. In a sense, it's a text. Basically, I'm following the outline of ideas in here. It kind of covers lots and lots of ideas and does it by just looking at lots of educational research. But the topics covered are good for us to be able to look at. And so if you want to see the outline, follow along with what's going on, you can get that course. The link for it is on the page. I know that it is... when I was looking, you could get a used one for $6 or $7 on Amazon. So that's the book. There's also some supplements to the course, and those are on the course page. We gave you the link for the first video lecture by Don Moss, Maintaining Teacher Effectiveness. And that is where he covers an overview of teaching. We're going to discuss that first one, just talk about a few things there before we get into today's lecture, because some of you probably watched that and maybe you have answered filled in the blanks on the document, the questions that was uploaded with it. And then I also mentioned that I feel a very good resource to read each week that it comes out is a newsletter by Michael Linson. He's a secular educator, but I think we agree on a lot of things. And he maintains the website Smart Classroom Management, and that link is there on the page. And I highly suggest that you go to the page and subscribe to his weekly newsletter. Some things might not apply to you, but he has a real good outlook on how to keep things orderly in your classroom, and much of it fits right within whatever the discipline system that you have at your school, and some of it fits without really any type of discipline system as far as ways you can help manage your classroom effectively. So last lecture on September 16th, we talked through what the course is about, and we discussed Chapter 1, which presented all the different teaching competencies, the layers of things that we will be talking about through the course of this lecture series. And then in the intervening weeks, we've given you the video from Maintaining Teacher Effectiveness to watch. And then today, we're going to look somewhat at Maintaining Teacher Effectiveness, that video. Just give you a few things that are there just to see if any of you had questions or comments. And in fact, if you have those, since the since the live stream chat is about 30 seconds behind me, if you have a question or comment from watching the video of Don Moss doing this overview of teaching, if you could put that in there now, so then I will see it as we are actually talking about it. So we're going to talk about that just a little bit, and then we'll get into communication skills. That's the topic for tonight from the outline we're using in the book is communication skills, and we are going to just talk through all different types of ideas that we can use, that we can employ, practice to help us communicate better and more effectively. So to begin with, I would like to just review or just look at some of the ideas that Don Moss mentions in his Maintaining Teacher Effectiveness video series, the first one. And I think it's interesting to me. I believe it's in this one where he asks, is teaching an art or a science? I mentioned that last time, whether teaching is an art or a science, and Don has a really good way to talk about that. He compares it, makes the analogy to his wife's cooking. And he says, I could invite you over to dinner, and we're going to have a steak dinner, all the fixings, steak, baked potato, grilled asparagus, whatever it is that you like for the best meal you have, you can think of. And but we're just kind of scientific about things. So we cook it, and then we put it in the blender, we mix it all together, and that's how we're going to eat it. I mean, all the nutrients there, all the flavors there, it doesn't matter, it's there. And you might say, well, but I'd like to enjoy it some. So that would be thinking about eating a steak dinner scientifically. Then he says, well, what if I just said it's going to look the best ever? She makes this beautiful meringue, and she's figured out a way to turn meringue into looking like a grilled steak and grilled asparagus and a baked potato, but it's really just fluff. It just looks like it. And that would be eating a steak dinner as an art. It's very artistic. It looks really good, but it doesn't taste like much. So eating a steak dinner, we want the science and the art, and the same goes for teaching. Teaching there's a science to it. There's laws that we can apply to it. There's Gregory talks about the law of the teacher and the law of the student and the law of language and the law of the lesson and the teaching process and all that. There's laws, but there's an art to it also. It's something that we can't just follow the laws. We are people, and so we're artistic. We're made to be artistic. So I thought that his comparison or analogy was very good. So is teaching an art or a science? And the answer is yes, of course it is. Then his definition of teaching, which is really, really interesting to me. At some point he says, teaching is a series of decisions that increases the probability of an intended outcome, which is really interesting. If you think about all the times, all the decisions that a teacher makes throughout the course of a day or throughout the course of just a lecture, there's so many split second decisions, minute little things, but there's a choice to be made, and those decisions are all being lined up, and they have an effect, and hopefully they produce the desired or the intended outcome. And so those series of decisions that we make as we're talking, as we're interacting, as we're responding, as we are even just deciding on whether to use this activity or another activity. So all those decisions, that series of decisions, is basically what is one way to look at what teaching is. It's a series of decisions. Quite interesting way to think about it, but then it helps us to think about it and helps us to narrow down, was this decision a good decision, or was this one, or could I have made a better choice here or there? So that to me was helpful. definition of teaching. And then he talked about the idea of if you were visiting a school and you were told that in some classrooms there were fake teachers and in other classrooms there were real teachers, how would you be able to tell the difference? Of course, the fakes aren't going to say they're a fake. They're trying to do something. They're trying to teach. And so how would you tell who was the fake and who was the phony teachers and who were the real teachers? And he mentioned 6 things, and I think 4 are especially important. And one of the others is something that we're talking about tonight, actually. So one is content. You know, a phony teacher could maybe sound really good, but after a while they wouldn't have much more to talk about. And another idea was planning skills. Once you've taught for a while, you understand, hopefully, the importance of planning your lesson, planning the hour, planning the series, planning whatever it is. So a real teacher would have some planning skills. A real teacher could use materials in an effective and comfortable way. A real teacher would display human growth, understand human growth and development, that certain ages of children are ready to learn in certain ways, and at other ages they learn in different ways. A phony teacher might have a hard time handling or managing a classroom, so a real teacher would understand classroom management, and a real teacher would have some practice in human relations. And it's interesting there. We're going to talk about a very important key element of human relations tonight. So then he asks or talks about 4 instructional skills, skills that a teacher has or must employ. And this applies to all teachers, whether you are teaching 3-year-olds, 3rd graders, college students, adults. And these 4 were: select an instructional objective that is at the correct level of difficulty, teach to the objective, monitor students and adjust the teaching, and make sure that what you're monitoring is something that's perceivable and validated, and then use the principles of learning. So the idea is, decide what you're going to teach. Is it something that is proper for the age of my students to learn? And then teach toward that. Present whatever it is that you have is so that your audience or your students can learn what it is you want them to learn. Then along the way, monitor. Make sure that what you're seeing, what the decisions you're making because of what you monitor are valid. Make sure that what you see is really what's happening, or what you hear. So the monitoring has to be something perceivable and validated. I think of, probably we'll talk about this in a future lecture, but just because students are shaking their head doesn't mean that they understand. They could just be shaking their head because they want to shake their head. So you want a physical response to be something that tells you that they are that they actually know what you're saying. When students nod their head, all you know is that they can nod their head. And then use principles of learning to teach to the objective. Several things that he mentions there that need to be defined and will be through the rest of the series. Active participation, which is the idea of everyone in the class participating at the same time. An anticipatory set, closure, elements of instruction, monitor and adjust. Motivation, he spends a whole lecture talking about that. Teaching to an objective, reinforcement, retention, and selecting an objective. Those are all things that you would want to define and understand to get a better understanding of what he was talking about in that lecture. I don't see anybody that has given us any comments from that. So those are my comments, and we will move along. So, tonight we're going to talk about, let's see here. we're going to talk about communication skills. And the communication skills are kind of even broader than teaching skills. Actually, some life skills that we need throughout our lives, are a prerequisite to good teaching skills. And communication skills are one of them. It's very important that we understand how to communicate with one another, how to interact with people. That's just foundational to what we're doing when we're standing in front of a classroom or standing in front of a group of people in any way. We're communicating with them and interacting with them. They are people, so we have an interpersonal relationship with them. We have an interpersonal relationship with a class. We have interpersonal relationship one-on-one with students, one-on-one with other teachers, with administrators. All different types of relationships that we have, and in all those relationships we're normally speaking. And along with our speaking, we are using gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, all of that. And so communication skills, speaking skills, communication skills, because more than just speaking, are essential, are prerequisite to good teaching skills. Someone has said, found in a study, that there are 5 components to effective communication. And I'm going to just list them and kind of talk a little bit quickly about them as we begin to think about communication. The first is precise terminology. If you want to communicate, if I want to communicate well, I should work at eliminating vague and ambiguous words and phrases. It's interesting to me that it's not just, how do we say that? I don't know. My brain went somewhere. Let's just call it back here and just repeat this. We want to have precise terminology. We should be careful not to use one word that is similar to 10 other words every time any one of those 10 other words could be used. Younger children will say, "Oh, that was funny." Sometimes we'll say, "It was funny." And then we'll stop and say, "Well, it's not funny, but that's the best word I can think of right now." Well, that's the idea. We want to try to be more effective in communication. We want to have a precise terminology. It probably wasn't funny. It was maybe ironic or some other word. So work at using particular, specific words and phrases and eliminate vagueness and ambiguities. Another component of effective communication is connected discourse. Connected discourse means your presentation is logically connected and leading to a point. I know there have been times when I haven't done this. I will have thought something through. I've done this teaching a Bible lesson or something. I've got a point I'm making, and I've got some verses, and I'm in the middle of giving it, and I read the verse, and I think, I know that's connected, but I don't know how to connect it, and so I just jump to the next verse. What did I just do? I just made a leap. There probably is a connection somewhere, but I haven't articulated it. So we want to, when we're speaking, when we're communicating, make our presentation logically connected and leading toward somewhere. It may be that we've designed our presentation to lead to a surprise ending, but the surprise shouldn't have come out of nowhere. It might be that you've placed clues in what you're saying and brought them to a point, and you come to this conclusion, and they can't deny it even though they didn't see it coming. They can't deny it because you've been logically bringing this to place. Or, and that would be kind of an inductive presentation, or deductively, we're stating something and we're proving it, but we can't make leaps in our proofs. We have to have each thing we say afterward is connected to the previous thing. So we want to have connected discourse. Too many times you are sitting somewhere and you're listening to someone, and it's hard to pay attention to them because you're trying to figure out where they're coming from. And when you just about got it, all of a sudden they say something else that in your mind is not related. You can't figure out where that is. So it's just tremendous amount of work to listen to them. You're trying to, but it's hard because the things they're saying are not connected logically, and they don't seem to be going anywhere. That's ineffective communication, and we don't want to be ineffective. So we want precise terminology that's presented logically, connected, and leading to a point. And then, as we're going along, the third part of effective communication is transition signals. So we want transition signals is the idea that it signals that an idea is ending and another is beginning. So we're not saying that you can only talk about one thing, but as you're going from one thing to the next, it should make sense. There should be a connection, and you transition. You signal that this is closing, this idea is closing down, or this idea is leading us into this new idea. However, whatever the logical sequence is, you give those signals, so it's just kind of being thoughtful of your listener to allow them to prepare for this new idea. So a transition signal. Then emphasis, being able to signal or let your listeners know that a certain idea or topic has special significance. We talk about many, many things, but is everything equally important? So being able to give emphasis to the things that are important is an element of having effective communication. Using precise terminology, discourse that's connected, or a presentation that's logically connected, leading somewhere, that has signals in it that tell the listeners that we're going to a new point, we're leaving an old point. We're able to emphasize what is important. And then the fifth part of effective communication is congruent verbal and nonverbal behavior. So congruent means that they're on top of each other, they are the same. And so what this part of the idea means is that what we're signaling with nonverbal behavior is congruent with what we're saying. You could use a lot of silly illustrations or funny illustrations that are the opposite of that. I could say, come here, and of course I'm signaling get out of here, but I'm saying come here. So, but that's kind of farcical. But sometimes when we're speaking, maybe we're tired, maybe we're sick, we've got to do it anyway, or maybe we're just not thinking about it, and our body is saying, this is not exciting, but our words are saying, this is one of the most important things you should ever hear. And so part of being effective in our communication is that what our body says and what our words say are congruent, that they match up. So, in the teaching competencies profile, under communication skills, we saw that as teachers we should model appropriate voice and spoken and written language. I don't have it there to look at the good example and the bad example, but a goal for us as teachers would be to model, that's an important word, appropriate voice, spoken, and written language. So the idea is that when we write, it's appropriate. We're modeling good written language, we're modeling good spoken language, and we're modeling good use of our voice. And so we have to know what good language is, what good spoken and written language is, and then we want to model it. And then the other part of communication skills that teachers should have is to use interpersonal skills effectively, to effectively use interpersonal skills. Now, we're coming to a point particularly with this, but probably with every part of our teaching, where we have to somewhat know ourselves, or we have to trust someone else to tell us what we're like. And certain people have talked about self-knowledge in these ways. So what do we know about ourselves? There's, you could think of it as 4 different panes in a window. Let's say we have a window here, and there's these 4 panes in it, and this is you. Okay? So in these panes represents you, and in the first pane is the public area. So the public area is information you know about yourself, and that most others know about you too. So that's what's public. Everybody knows this about you. You know it about yourself, and other people know it about you. Then there is the blind area. All of us have a blind area. I have a blind area. You have a blind area. So the blind area is information about yourself that you do not know, but others do. Sometimes it's just for a short amount of time. I mean, you say to somebody, hey, who knows what, something that they didn't know they were doing. It might be even just bad breath. You've got bad breath. If you know you have bad breath, that's something else. Most people don't, you don't know that your breath is bad. You don't smell it. But other people know it, or you have a certain speech mannerism. You've done it so much, you don't even realize that you do all the time. You use a certain phrase, and it's just nonsensical even if you were to read it in a sentence printed out, but you use that phrase all the time. You don't even know that you do that. And there would be many other things. And this is where it would be nice if we were not 30 seconds apart for some of you to say, well, maybe it wouldn't be nice. It would be funny for you to say things about other people that is blind to them. It might be gossip, though. We wouldn't want to do that. So, but there's the blind area. Things about ourselves that we don't know. Like right now, I don't know what's on my back. There's probably a sign that says, kick me or something like that. But then there's a hidden area. Okay? The hidden area is information about yourself that you know, but others do not. There's certain things that I know about myself that I'm going to do my best to make sure nobody else knows. Or only the closest friends that will not share that information with anyone else. So it's information about myself that I know, but others don't know. And we all have that area. And then there's the unknown area. Unknown area is information about yourself that you don't know and no one else knows. You say, well, how do you know that it's there? Well, in our own lives, there have been situations where we've been called upon to do something, and lo and behold, we could do it well. We had never done it before. We never thought of doing it before. And yet when we were told to do it or had to do it or thought, oh, I should do that, we realized we liked it and we did it well. That was an unknown area. No one else even knew we could do that. So at certain times, and I'm just going to mention this now because I don't know how it's going to fit in, but one of the ways to look at this is to, one of the ways to have better communication with people is to work at increasing the size of this public area. Increase the size of this public area. I know this about me, and other people know this about me. And if we have the same perception about me, the other people perceive the same thing about me that I perceive, it's public. The bigger the area that is, the better communication I'm going to have with that person. And I suppose these pains about me would be different for every single person I know if we wanted to just get into this a real lot. But as we make this public area bigger, the hidden area gets smaller. the blind area gets smaller. I have bad breath. Some people don't feel comfortable telling me that I have bad breath, but somebody else will say, hey, you got your breath is awful today. What'd you have to eat? Well, all of a sudden that blind area is no longer blind. So it increases this, between me and him at least, it increases that public area. This hidden area, I confide in somebody something about myself and make that public between me and them or him. Well, then it may be that, so that happens, I can have an even more open conversation with that person. I might tell one person I'm struggling with something, but I tell that person and they think, I wonder if it has to do with that. And we have a better conversation. We have more effective communication because this hidden area of my life is not hidden to him. And so if we push the boundaries here, we're going to have better, more effective communication with people. So, how well do you know yourself? How can you find out about yourself better? How can you learn blind areas? There's a lot of different tools there. You could ask people. You could video yourself, watch it later on. But anyway, this idea of self-knowledge is important because we should be thinking this a little bit all the time, especially if we want to get better at something. If we just are always sitting there thinking, well, I'm good. I think I'm good. I don't know that I'm not good. Don't tell me that I'm not good. Then we're not going to improve. And of course, I think everybody listening here, one of the reasons you're listening or watching is because you want to improve. So, some ideas to discuss concerning communication skills. That was kind of just like overview, getting us into the idea of communication skills. Now, I want to talk about, let's see here, there'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of skills. Some are directly related to speaking, and others are more closely related to our interacting with people, or what is called interpersonal skills. So, let's begin with the most obvious, at least I think they're the most obvious, and that is oral communication skills. We're talking about communicating, that includes speaking. So, what skills should you use, should you have, should you develop, should you work on to help yourself communicate more effectively orally? The first is audibility. Audibility makes sense, doesn't it? It means you need to make sure that you're loud enough, but not too loud. I wish we could. How many of you have heard a sermon or heard a lecture or something, and it was so loud you were distracted from what the person was saying? I've been in this situation many times. I'm sitting there. I want to listen. It's a sermon. I'm supposed to listen, especially me. I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to appreciate all sermons. I can't appreciate it. It hurts. There's 2 people that come to my mind immediately. When they speak or when they spoke, it hurt. It hurt my ears. I was like, can't the guy in the sound booth tell that this is painful? And the whole time, I have a really hard time listening to what they're saying because it's too loud. There's something to be said for being loud. You want to be heard. And you want to be, especially as a preacher, you are the center of attention at that time. Not because it's you, but because you are presenting God's Word. And that should be front and center, and nothing else should take the attention away. At the same time, as a kindness to those you're listening to, you don't want it to be painful just to listen to the Word. Or a lecture or a lesson, whatever it is that you're doing. Being too soft makes people work too hard, or they have a very hard time hearing everything that you're saying. They hear this word and that word, and then they have to fill in. I would rather be the one that fills in, especially if I'm doing my best to use precise terminology I don't want someone else filling in there. They don't know what I'm saying. I'm the one that knows what I'm saying. So audibility, we need to be loud enough, but not too loud. People know that. That's why they say, no sound for me, half an hour ago. You want to be able to hear. So make sure that when you're speaking, that people can hear you, but that you're not too loud. Then, the next oral communication skill after audibility is clarity. Clarity. The idea is to choose words and sentence structures that are descriptive, concise, and suitable. Excuse me. Try not to cough on the microphone. But words and sentence structures that are descriptive, concise, and suitable. So that gives us, every word in our language is an option there. Suitability means that some words that are good for 8th graders aren't going to work for 2nd graders. Some words that are going to work for sophomores in college or students in graduate school aren't going to work for 9th graders. It might be a concise, precise word, but since it's unknown to the younger age, then it's not suitable. We want to try to be clear, and clarity comes from being descriptive, concise, and suitable. Sometimes, and we all fall prey to this, we want to make sure people understand, and so we talk. And we add words on top of words, and we're not concise. We conflate. We just put more and more things in there. And we've said it so many times that the listener is thinking, okay, so now which one is it? We've said too much. So clarity comes from descriptive, concise, suitable words. Avoid run-on, fragmented, or incomplete statements and questions. This is something that I notice when talking, especially these days with teenagers, that they hardly finish sentences. And I'm waiting so I know what they're asking or what they're saying. Their friends apparently know. It's a special language. It's code. But sometimes you're in a conversation and they don't finish the sentence and they think they've made their point. To them, they've made it with force. And it's unassailable argument, and I don't even understand what they've said. Could be my fault, could be their fault, but since I'm the one on camera, I think it's their fault. It's an incomplete statement, in my understanding. So there's ways that I can tactfully respond to that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyway, so oral communication, we want to be audible, clear, audibility, clarity, enunciation. Enunciation. Speak so each word or sentence is distinct, with consonants and vowels phrased correctly, with crisp word endings and beginnings and endings. It is a tendency of this age to drop off the ends of words. They don't finish words, they. Fill in the they. You know them too. They don't finish words, even in songs. You can be in the grocery store and you hear this country song over the top and they don't even finish the words of their songs. You can hear Christian singers and they're singing the same way as these country singers. It's a style. It's a speaking and communication style that's ineffective. It's sloppy. It's lazy and many other things. So don't do that. Enunciate. Speak clearly. Use the consonants and the vowels correctly. Phrase correctly. Crisp word endings and beginnings. Enunciation is important. Variation and emphasis. Variation and emphasis is good to use in our oral communication. Vary the speech rate. Vary the speed of the words that are coming out of your mouth. Vary the volume. High, loud, soft. Vary the inflection. Be careful not to over-vary the inflection so as to put, say words in a way that makes them unintelligible, a normal word with inflection in the wrong place. But vary your inflection, vary the tone. So volume is loudness, softness. Tone is highness and lowness of pitch. Use silence for emphasis or to allow thinking time, and avoid a monotone speech. So in our oral communication skills, we want to have variation and emphasis. Silence can be very effective. It's hard to do when there's not many people in the room. But it can be used several different ways, and it's something that I encourage teachers to use. Many times, teachers think, they might not use these words, but they tend to think, I'm paid to teach. It's almost like they get paid per word that comes out of their mouth, And so they just talk, and don't give enough time, don't give any time to think, don't use silence. Silence is very effective, and I encourage all speakers to use silence. Don't overuse it, though. You're supposed to laugh at that. Language usage. I think this is related to enunciation, but it's beyond enunciation. Language usage. Use grammatically correct language. Avoid slang. Avoid sloppy speech. Things like I'm gonna take this to the store, kinda, sorta. That's sloppy speech that is not a model of good speech. Perhaps everybody does it, everybody speaks that way. But as teachers, especially in an academic sense, as teachers, you should be modeling what's proper and what's correct. So use correct language, avoid the use of slang, and avoid sloppy speech. And then eliminate speech mannerisms that distract or annoy. And we all have these. I've been employing them today, not purposefully, but I hear myself saying and whatever when my brain is trying to think of something. Better not to say anything, just stop. But try to eliminate these speech mannerisms that distract or annoy. I know I've told this to some of my college classes. Some of you may have heard this. But there was a teacher, I think when I was in 7th or 8th grade, that he was known for saying It was so much a part of how he taught that it was continuous. And so as a jerk 7th or 8th grader once, I just kind of took a little, you know how you can just count off every time you hear an and I can't remember, but it was scores. I think it was anywhere from 70 to 100. I don't like to admit that about myself. That was supposed to go over here in this hidden area. But don't say So be careful to watch out for that. Let someone else tell you, and then slow down. Listen to yourself. Cut out the okays, the uh-huhs, the and-uhs, and the ums, etc. I'm going to just go ahead and erase this while I'm turned around. There we go. So, oral communication skills. These several areas are things to check yourself on. Know yourself. Are you good at it? Are you okay? Could you improve? Audibility, clarity, enunciation, variation and emphasis, language usage, mannerisms. Then there are nonverbal communication skills. Nonverbal communication skills include facial expression. You want to support your words with your facial expression. Avoid being expressionless and dull. To me, this is something, I don't know that I'm good at this at all. In fact, I guess I probably am not. But I know that it's something that, that singing groups sometimes get criticized about. I've been in charge of singing groups and tried to help them. They're singing a song about heaven, and they don't look like it. They're, who knows what the text, what the message of the song is, and they don't look at all like it's happy or exciting or anything. I've often said to groups, think about the words. And so they do. They think about the words. And they look even worse. So for singers, I would say, try to make your face actually express what the words are saying. And in the same way, I think this is not something that we should overly think about, but we should be open to someone saying, I wasn't catching that from what you were saying. It didn't seem like it was happy. You might watch a video of yourself, and I'm using happy, that's kind of an easy one, but you might watch a video of yourself and see, is what you're saying with your face matching the words that are coming out of your mouth? Some people don't have any expression on their face, and we want to be careful not to be that way either. So, support the words that you're saying with your facial expression and avoid being expressionless and dull. Another thing is movement. Move around some to help keep students' attention. So today, actually, I have been using the chalkboard, and as I was reading this, I realized that I was. Maybe it's because I was reading this earlier today. I did not intend to use the chalkboard, I just decided to. So on your screen, the screen is not moving, but I'm moving around a little bit on the screen. Movement is helpful. It is just kind of helps your students' eyes to shift even just a little bit. It helps them to stay attentive. We want to be careful not to, if at all possible, to maintain eye contact. So, of course, when you're looking at the board, you don't have eye contact. But you want to try to not lose contact with your class, with your students. This would be more for, in my thinking, classroom management situation. If you're turned around and just writing lots of stuff on the board, you don't know what's happening behind you unless you're one of those teachers that have eyes in the back of your head. So you want to, if you got a lot to put on the board, get it on the board before students are in the class. But it does help to move around some. At the same time, I see young students, college students, in our Bible club here that they're telling the story. Some of them tell the story like this. And they're just moving constantly, and the constant movement is as much a distraction as not moving. And so this is the picture that they're showing, and they're holding it like this. So just for you that are watching this from a Sunday school perspective, make sure that your movements are not pacing, and when you're keep your body and especially your visual to the audience. The girl that's pacing, the kids can see the picture almost not at all, because it's always going from one side to the other. It's just they get a glimpse of it when she changes directions. So be aware of that. Movement is good, but don't pace. And try to be careful, or be careful to try to maintain eye contact. Then gestures or gestures. Gestures. Be sure that your gestures aid rather than distract. I think that most of us, after a while, if we've spoken in front of people and taught, we don't think much about it, and we maybe don't need to think much about it. I remember as a senior in high school in our speech class, we talked about gestures and making sure that the timing was accurate and all of that. I'll never forget the visual illustration that the teacher gave. It was something like, "I want you to get out of this class now." So the timing was off, of course. But most of us, once we're somewhat comfortable in front of an audience, we just let our hands and our face do what they do. We don't have to think too much about it. At the same time, we should be careful. We should be open to finding out that something that we're doing is distracting. It's not helping. Whatever we're doing with our hands, gesturing, it needs to be something that helps along the words that we're saying and doesn't take away from them. Then mannerisms. There are speech mannerisms, which we mentioned already, but there are also nonverbal mannerisms we want to avoid. And these things distract and or annoy. Scratching yourself, you might always scratch the inside of your nose, per se, or some other spot. Playing with an object. Some people, we don't have fidget spinners, but we're tapping with a pencil or something, just a nervous mannerism, cracking knuckles. I don't know, maybe I have something here that I'm doing that's distracting or annoying. But either way, we want to try to eliminate those, obviously. We should be open to hearing what they are and then watching for them in ourselves, noticing when we do those things, and then trying to figure out how to stop ourselves from doing them. Eye contact is another nonverbal communication skill. We want to make all the students feel that they are being personally addressed. Now, you can't look at every single student at the same time, but you want to, especially if a student has a question, you want to be looking at them, you're addressing them. When you're not addressing a particular student, be careful of looking at a certain spot in the room, like, I don't know, the chalkboard, or what else? What other things I have here? Just any one particular spot or object too much. Sometimes something just catches your eye. It's your classroom or it's not your classroom. Something seems out of place and you find yourself looking there a lot. Why is that there? But at the same time, again, try not to just look at one spot. There's this camera in the middle of the room here, and I keep avoiding looking at it. And really, I should be looking at it because you're my pretty much only audience. Abraham is there still, making sure everything's going well, and so far, we still have sound, so we're good. But eye contact, notice if you are not making eye contact with your audience, with your students, and then try to make sure that you do. Silence. Silence is a nonverbal, of course, communication skill, and we can use silence for several different things. One is to gain attention. I use this tool every Sunday morning. Here in the auditorium, I'm the one that starts the service off, and so everybody's talking and getting, saying hi to one another and whatever else goes on before a Sunday morning service, lots of different things. I come up and say something like, "Good morning, welcome to Fairhaven Baptist Church and our Sunday morning services." And somewhere right after that, maybe I say one or two more sentences, I just stop. Because the noise doesn't stop just because I happen to show up and speak over the sound system. So I have to stop. Pause. Wait for people to notice that a lot of other people have stopped making noise, and then they look and it gets attention. Silence gets attention. Now that's dealing with 400 or 500 people in a room. But even in your own classroom, it will get your attention. Some of you were looking somewhere else and was wondering what was going on because you weren't paying attention to me, and so I stopped talking and you had to look back and see what was happening there. And I got your attention just by being silent. So you can use silence to gain attention. You can use silence for emphasis. You can emphasize something. If it's a very important point, you make that point and then you just stop and let it sink in. And the silence allows that point to think in. To think in. That's maybe a good mistake of use words. The silence says to the person, he just said something important. And they remember it and they think, oh yeah. And it allows them to think about it, which is another thing. Provide time to think. Many times we ask a question and then we don't give students a chance to think about the question. It's not really a question. It's just a sentence with a question mark at the end of it. If you want students to think about something, you got to give them time. If you're up there just talk, and ask them to think about something and then start talking some more about the same thing or about something else, they've got no chance to think. If they are trying to think, they've got to block out what you're saying, and they've been taught to be respectful and to listen to what you're saying. Use silence to give students a time to think. You can even use silence to deal with a minor disruption. Something happens, and whatever, elbows bump one another, and distraction is taking place. You notice it, you're quiet, and very quickly the people that have been distracted realize they're distracted and they pay attention again. So silence is a nonverbal communication skill that is one that I think it would be very useful for us to employ, and it might be one that many don't employ. I don't hear many people use silence as a communication tool. And then the last nonverbal communication skill is actually physical contact. You could use tactile contact, tapping a kid on the shoulder, patting them on the back, maybe a fist bump. Who knows what it is? But physical contact you could guide a student's hand if they're younger kids are trying to do something, and you could just over their hand use something to use your hand to help them with something they're doing. You could show approval, like I say, with physical contact. Of course, be sure to use discretion and remember the students, their age and their gender. If you're just congratulating somebody, I don't think that really matters who it is. As long as, I just don't see myself, doing that with Pastor Dameron. Me and Pastor Dameron, we just congratulate each other. Okay? With other adults, I don't see that happening. Maybe certain people that know more of my hidden personality or something, perhaps. But there's certain physical contact is just fine, but others is not. And you should have a kind of a gauge of what is allowable, what is good to use, especially remembering the age and gender of your students. All right, so those are the communication skills. The nonverbal communication skills: facial expression, movement, gestures, mannerisms, eye contact, silence, and physical contact. And those, along with the oral communication skills of audibility, clarity, enunciation, variation in emphasis, language usage, and mannerisms. These are all communication skills that we should work at, think about, and try to improve in if we want to be better communicators. Then we want to sort of transition to interpersonal skills. So when we're working with someone, talking to someone, teaching somebody, we're interacting with them. Some of that interaction, in fact, as teachers, lots and lots and lots of that interaction is communicating. So we had this first part that's all communicating. Oral communication, or verbal communication, nonverbal communication, but that communication is part of interacting with students, other teachers, with a class, with our administrators. And so we want to just think a little bit now about those interpersonal skills, interacting with others. So first there, since we're talking about communication, let's think about, listening skills. How do you become a better listener? And maybe I'm not the one to teach this, but I found some things that seem like they would be true, that I probably should employ myself. And so let's just think about this a little bit. How to be a better listener. First, we want to be empathetic. Empathetic, E-M-P-A-T-H. I don't have the rest of the word there. I have empathy. Employ empathy. Have empathy. E-M-P-A-T-H-Y. So that is empathy, and it's similar, sounds like sympathy, and we're going to contrast it to help us understand it. But empathy is trying to understand what a person is saying and feeling. So someone is talking to me, they feel a certain way about the topic. I'm empathetic when I'm trying to understand what they're saying and how they're feeling. Sympathy is trying or actually agreeing with and feeling the same as a person. So when somebody is hurting, we might send them a sympathy card. We want to say, I'm hurting with you. We probably aren't, because we're not actually going through what they're going through. But we would say that. We want to feel like they are feeling. If we can feel like they're feeling, then we're actually really can be quite a help to that person. But sometimes it's not just we don't want to necessarily agree with and feel the same as them. But if we're communicating with someone, we want to understand how they are, what they're saying, and how they feel. What's their state of mind behind what they're saying? And so that is empathy, trying to understand what a person is saying and feeling. Then sincerity is important, and that's just being genuine. It doesn't seem like it takes much explanation. I would say if you're listening to someone and you're also being distracted by other things, you're not sincerely listening to them. You don't really care about them. You care about whatever you're allowing to distract you. I just mentioned that in today's day, there are, we kind of let other things pull our attention away from somebody that we really would want to sincerely listen to, but we have devices that distract us. It's important in interpersonal relationships or in interacting with people that both people involved in the conversation listen. And people have put together different lists. I found this list of 10 things that are important if you want to be a better listener. And so I'm just going to list them here. It's kind of interesting. As I was looking at them, I need to work on these things. First, stop talking. If you want to hear what other people are saying, stop talking. Then put all your energy into listening. If you're listening to something, put your energy into that. Don't let your energy be siphoned off in other things, thinking about something else, doing something else. Just listen. Notice your own filters when listening. If you're listening to someone, all of you have some filters up. There's certain things about me or something about this course or this class. You're filtering. We already probably should filter. As Christians, we should always be filtering, but we should notice what those filters are. It's just we're built-in biases and filters. We put those up, we live with them there, but notice what they are. See how what the person's saying is being filtered by your thoughts. And then notice whether you should take that filter down, or whether you say, wow, I really need that filter there. So notice your own filters when listening. Don't argue mentally. I do it. You probably do it. Somebody's talking to you and you've already got an argument built up in your mind already. Don't argue mentally. Listen. Inhibit or try to push down the impulse to immediately answer questions. Let the person continue to talk. They have a question, don't immediately answer. Think about it. Let it sink in. Adjust to your situation. Sometimes you wonder, you're listening, you're in a conversation, you wonder, okay, is it time to speak? If you think, should I listen? Should I keep listening, or should I say something? Just keep listening. That's better. You'll be a better listener. You'll get more from it and then be able to respond better because you got more from it. Work at listening. There's a lot of listening here to be a good listener. Work at it. So put all your energy into it. Work at it. And then listen generously with a willingness to be influenced. If I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm going to listen to this guy, but I'm not changing anything, or I don't respect him, or I don't think he has anything worth listening to, my ears are open, I'm hearing what he's saying, but I'm arguing with everything he says, I'm not willing to be influenced by him, I'm not really even hearing what he says. I'm not being a good listener. So, for good interactions to happen, we have to be listeners. And I mentioned this in the idea of interacting. We ought to be trying to teach our children, our own children, and our students how to do this. One of the ways to teach, again, is to model. If they're saying something, we should be listening, trying to understand the feeling that's behind what they're saying, and listen. And we have to work at listening. We're the teacher. We know everything, right? We know the answer to every student's question, every question that they could think of, we know the answer to. They start asking the question and we know the answer to it already. That's dangerous. We want to make sure we listen. So work at that. Listen for the feelings that go with the words. We talked about the nonverbal communication skills, facial expression, excuse me. We haven't talked about variation and emphasis in the communication skills with speech rate and all of that. All of those things convey certain things, and we want to, as we're listening, listen for more than just the words that are being said. Listen for how they're being said. Listen for what feelings they might be communicating along with it. All right. So then, let's mention some, actually this will be the end of what we have, is some interpersonal skills for understanding. And this is divided two ways. So there's two things. Some skills that we can use to help understand others, and some skills to be used to be understood. So the first ones, to understand others, is paraphrasing. Or the first one is paraphrasing. My brain is saying that I'm not saying this the right way. Give me a second. All right, so anyway, I don't know if I'm categorizing these right. I know the 4 skills here, but I might not have them in the right category. So let's just talk about the actual skills. Paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is a test that we can use, or that is employed to ensure that the message received is the same as the one sent. So, when we paraphrase, we could use this in a couple different ways. If I'm paraphrasing, I've listened to someone else, and I want to make sure that I understand them. So some things to remember if I'm paraphrasing is, if I'm paraphrasing what they say, I don't want to indicate whether I agree or disagree, because that's not the point. I don't know whether I agree or disagree until I know whether I really understand what they've said. I could disagree with something, and that person disagrees with that too, and it's not even what they said. I've been in conversations like that, and you probably have too. Somebody disagreed with you, and they didn't even know what you said. So paraphrasing is something I use. Let's just put it in this way. I use this. I'm talking with someone else. They have said something to me, and I'm going to paraphrase. So I don't want to indicate whether I approve or disapprove. I don't even fully understand. I'm going to put their statement into my words, avoiding just repetition. I don't want to just say the same thing as them, because that doesn't really show that I understood what they said, just that I heard and can repeat it. I want to be attentive and interested, concentrate on what they're saying, and then listen for the feelings behind the words. And then as I say back to them, so they said something to me, then I say, so you think something, and I wanted to say this with a tone of voice that's not judging. I could say, well, you think whatever, I'm not saying that. I want to say it in a way so that they know that I'm just trying to make sure that I understand what they say. I might say, do you mean that? Or it seems to me that you think this. Whatever, I'm going to say this, and then they hopefully will respond, and they might say, yeah, that's just what I'm saying. Well, then we can talk about what they said, because we both have the same idea. But they probably will say, well, sort of, but this. And so then I want to rephrase again until we get to agreement about what the person meant. I've got just an example from the book, and it's I think it's kind of corny, but it does work as an example. So I'm going to just read this example to you about paraphrasing. So the example is, there's a supervisory teacher or an advisory teacher saying to a student teacher, for the next lesson, I would like you, using lots of color information, to present the various kinds of appeals that advertisers could use to get consumers to buy products. So the student teacher, in response, says, do you mean that you want me to teach about the various ways color can be used in advertising? The advisory teacher says, no, I'd like you to present the various emotional appeals that advertisers use to influence consumer choice, supporting each category of appeal with real-life examples. So the student teacher replies, oh, using actual examples from the media, you want me to teach the psychological appeals used by advertisers. And the advisory teacher says, you got it. Okay, so in the example there, something was said with some detail in it, and the listener got one portion of it and then actually twisted it a little bit, not purposefully, but they just heard one thing and they thought, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. But they rephrased. They said, so do you mean that you want me to do this? And when they said that, the person talking could understand that they needed to rephrase themselves. So then when the listener paraphrased the second time, they got it. And it's a good thing they got it in the second time. Otherwise, we would be reading and reading and reading. So sometimes it might take more than twice. But paraphrasing then is a way that we can use when we're speaking with somebody to make sure that we understand what they're saying. And I think this is something that can actually be employed with students. Of course, we're the teacher. But if a student says something, you can paraphrase back to them, do you mean or are you saying that this? And if the student doesn't say that, then you don't need to tell them what a dumb person they were, because that's not even what they thought. I'm sticking my tongue in my cheek at the moment. But you understand what I'm saying. We can model paraphrasing so that we understand what students are saying. That way, we have better interactions with them. And as we model it, and they see how that interaction works better by paraphrasing, they may begin to do it too. Or you have examples before your students, and you can say, remember when you said this and I followed up with this? You can do the same thing when you're talking to your friends, or when you're asking me a question, or when I'm asking you a question. If I ask you a question, you can paraphrase that question and make sure that you understand what I'm asking. So, paraphrasing. The next one is perception checking, and this is used to make sure you are interpreting another person's feelings accurately. Now, it might be an accurate use of the word, but I don't like the way this text is so much concerned about people's feelings. At the same time, maybe it's just I have a hitch with that word feelings. Because what it says and what we're seeing here is very, very important. We could say a set of 5 words about 15 different ways, and the only difference between them is not the words, it's the feeling that goes with them. You could say, I love something, and you could be talking about a girlfriend, a wife, a husband, a candy bar, a picture, a vista, the Grand Canyon, or a city. There's so many different objects of that phrase, and the feelings that are expressed with the phrase help us put it in context, and that's simple. So it's important for us to perceive, to know what the feelings are, or the affections maybe of the person that is speaking. So be careful when we do this not to interpret others by our own frame of reference. If somebody says something and if you were saying that about this, you would mean this. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they mean. That's the way they feel about it. It can be done indirectly. You can listen more carefully, watch for more nonverbal clues. And that's probably what you should do first. You're watching, you're trying to pay attention, and then if it's important, if it's something that you really are interacting about, you might want to just ask directly. Try to find out whether what you perceived is what they actually felt. And so you should state what you think carefully and unemotionally. Something like, maybe, it seems like what I said hurt your feelings. Did I? It may be that you didn't. It's just that you read their response in a different in that way. You look bewildered. Are you? Some people just always look bewildered, and they're not. Some are, but you look bewildered. Are you? You appear to be nervous when I asked you to do something. Were you? Just because they looked like they were nervous doesn't mean that they were. If you thought they were nervous, then you're going to follow, have some idea of ways to help them overcome their nervousness, or maybe you don't ask them to do that again because you think it's too early to push them into that, and they were never nervous in the first place. So this kind of reading people, we're not God. We don't know what they're thinking, and so it helps to try to be perceptive and then actually talk about it. Am I right in thinking that you were disappointed with these results or with what happened? So those are ways that you can frame rather than saying, what's wrong with you? I've been in situations where I've said that to somebody. So what's wrong with you? And really, it seems like something's bothering you. Do you want to talk about it? But I said, what's wrong with you? Not very good. Not very good interpersonal skills. And we can apply that to so many things that we have in our own lives. So that's perception checking. Then the last two, and we'll be finished, feelings description. So somebody is speaking to you, and we're trying to tell what they're saying and then how they feel about what they're saying at the same time. We express our feelings verbally, right? With tone of voice and even the words that we say, and even non-verbally. So feelings description is when we're describing their feelings, we should be matter-of-fact and informative. Don't be accusing or implying. Let's see here. So let's just give an example here. We could say, somebody might say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Well, you shouldn't have done that could mean a few different things. It could be, I really liked your gift to me, right? Or it could mean, your gift makes me feel obligated to you. Or I feel bad now because I gave you a far cheaper gift or a much less valuable gift. You shouldn't have done that could mean any one of those things. Maybe you want it to mean all three of those things. But that's where you shouldn't have done that is kind of saying that they shouldn't have done something rather than expressing what your feelings are. You might be suddenly silent. You just all of a sudden I've been in these conversations, all of a sudden the person just stops talking and they almost stop responding to you. You don't know how they're feeling, but they don't express it. So you find yourself in that situation, you might say, I feel like you were putting me down. Okay, maybe you don't want to say that. Maybe you want to say, he's putting me down and I need it, but I don't like it. Okay, but it could be that what you said reminded me of something sad. But the person is thinking that you don't like what they're telling you. So this feeling description is important to part of interacting with people. So our actions and interactions, we should be careful that if we're acting a certain way that can be interpreted multitudes of ways, we try to describe our feelings so that they're not misinterpreted, so that our actions aren't misinterpreted to mean something else. And then, finally, behavior description. So, you're in your class, students are doing something, they've done this thing or that thing, and you, or even if it's somebody not a student, maybe somebody you're equal, they've done something, they've done an action, they've behaved in a particular way. It can be helpful to describe, you're in an interaction with them, to describe what you saw. The description should be specific but non-accusative without judging it to be good or bad. So if you're in a classroom and you saw something, you might say, Bill, I just saw this. Say it without judging or anything. At the same time, it might be that if that was an accurate description of it, it might become very clear that it was a good thing or a bad thing. It might not be that you saw accurately, but if you did see accurately and they confirm it, then it could be something worth praising or something worth punishing. But it helps to be non-judgmental at first, at least. Sometimes you don't need to be judgmental at all. You're just trying to understand what's going on. Some things do need to be judged. We're Christians, we believe in that. But at the same time, you might... Many times, we as Christians, for some reason, we think we're God and we know what people are doing and we know what people are thinking and we just assign that to people without finding out, without knowing. And this is where it is feelings description and behavior description and even perception checking can be helpful so that we don't make a faulty judgment or faulty response. Somebody might say to a student, Nathan, you seem to take the opposite side of whatever I say today. You could say, you don't like anything I'm saying. You disagree with everything today. Or you're showing off how much you know or something like that. Those would all be accusing the person. And It might not be true. I could see this. Jose, when I was telling the story, you were smiling. I'm puzzled. Now, you could think he was smirking and thinking about his friend across the street, across the room, or distracted. But if you just say that, he might actually say what he was actually thinking about. It might be something that you're glad he was thinking about. So describing behavior without saying it's right and wrong when you don't know it was right or wrong can be helpful. So these behaviors help us when we interact with people. Again, with students, sometimes I'm not saying that every time you see something and it's a bad behavior, you have to describe it to make sure that it was a bad behavior. We know kids are bad. They do things bad, and many things can just be punished. And that will actually stop it, and it won't happen anymore. But sometimes we don't know. Or sometimes it's not a teacher-student, it's a teacher-to-teacher situation. And you're not going to punish a teacher, you're just going to hold a grudge against them. But if you had just described what you saw, and they could say, oh no, that wasn't that at all, I was doing this, and then you can laugh about a misunderstanding rather than go for weeks thinking that something was wrong. And that's interpersonal skills in interacting with one another. So for tonight, we talked about communication and how important it is. Excuse me. We mentioned where'd they go? The oral communication skills, nonverbal communication skills, listening skills, and then interpersonal skills of paraphrasing, perception checking, feelings description, and behavior description. And between now and our next lecture, we will make available the next video in the Maintaining Teacher Effectiveness series and the questions that guide us along with that. And then in our next session, which will be November 18th, we will discuss that video and we'll discuss diversity in students from a Christian perspective, but in every one of our classes there's differences. Students are different. They come from different backgrounds. I think every one of your classes has boys and girls in it, and there's a distinction there. And there's so many differences there that we want to make sure that we notice and react to and teach well. And so we'll be talking about diversity in our classrooms next time on November 18th. I hope that you were helped by this lecture, and glad that you were here with us. 9 people watching still, all the way to the end. You deserve an award. Good. All right, you'll get that in 30 seconds. Did you stop the stream? No. Oh, you can stop it.